Hello. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the third year of the Novelline Innovation Speaker Series. And this is, I think, the 7th edition. So we're really fortunate and happy to welcome our guest speaker today. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Innovation Speaker Series first. So the Novelline series invites leaders in healthcare innovation, design thinking, and care delivery to really share their experiences and lessons learned with the national community. This whole series was made possible by a generous gift from Bill and Eileen Novelline. And it's held quarterly and provides a unique opportunity for members of the Mass General community to reflect on our own experiences and hopefully our own practices and reinvigorate the passion for making healthcare better. So it's a real pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Richard Zane. And it's a pleasure to welcome you back to Boston as well. So Rich serves as the George B. Bodecker Professor and Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Also the Professor of Health Administration at Colorado Business School, and relevant to this topic today, the Chief Innovation Officer of the UC Health System. So Dr. Zane completed his medical school at Temple University of Philadelphia, and he tells me over drinks last night that so this is an interesting story. So he did his undergrad at Hopkins and then spent some time as a teacher. And the only reason he went to medical school was to impress his wife, who also was a teacher, and is now an orthopedic surgeon. But following all that, he went to residency training in emergency medicine at Hopkins, where he actually spent a year as a chief of service, assistant chief of service. And in 1998, was recruited to Harvard in the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and rose the ranks there to become eventually the vice chair of emergency medicine. Probably the most of many accomplishments in his career, one of the most important things that I found interesting was while at Brigham, through funding from the AHRQ and the Department of Homeland Security, he formed industry partnerships to develop the tools necessary for preparedness and response to mass casualties. And these tools were now used actually across many casualties domestically and internationally, including the earthquake in Haiti, Hurricane Katrina, the recent Boston Marathon bombings, and most recently the flooding in Houston, and actually formed the basis for the WHO's Guide for Hospital Preparedness. So really before the whole term of systems engineering became popular, which has incredible expertise in thinking about how to merge industrial engineering with informatics to improve care design, access, and clinical integration. So unfortunately in 2012, you were recruited, stolen away from partners, recruited to the University of Colorado to actually become the inaugural chair of emergency medicine. The system at the time did not actually have a department of ED. And in a short amount of 5 years, the Colorado Hospital ED is now actually ranked #2 in the nation. And then more recently, 2 years ago, he was named the Chief Innovation Officer for all of UC Health. And Dr. Zane has focused on the development of novel industry-academia partnerships to bring innovative solutions to healthcare. By partnering with companies, both small, startup, and multinational organizations, and using the power of data science, remote patient monitoring, prescriptive analytics, he's attempted to fundamentally alter the way we deliver care. Last but not least, his work has been featured in many prominent journals, including the Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, and most recently, the New England Journal of Catalyst, named him a thought leader in medicine. And most recently, I think you were named the top 30 Chief Innovation Officers in the nation. So with that, welcome, Dr. Zane, and we'll be talking about can innovation, digital revolution save healthcare? Thank you.
So thank you for reading the introduction that my mom wrote. And it's really nice to see old friends in the audience. I just need to learn how to use the slide advancer. I do have some conflicts that I have to point out. I really want to tell you why I have to describe my conflicts. So I went from Partners Healthcare and Brigham and Women's Hospital and moved to the Wild West in 2012. And as mentioned, I had a little background in emergency preparedness and disaster response. My family's very first day in Colorado was the Aurora Theater shooting. So I'd been there for 3 months. I drove across the country, brought my family, and that first day was the Aurora Theater shooting. Along with one of my faculty, after the theater shooting, I wrote an op-ed piece in the Denver Post. And the op-ed piece was about the challenge with the confluence of unfettered access to guns and the lack of behavioral health resources, how that together is not a good thing. And I got a cease and desist letter from the University of Colorado Board of Regents reminding me that I do not represent the University of Colorado. So I do not represent the University of Colorado, University of Colorado Health. So now that I've got that out of the way, I can say almost anything I like. These are some of the companies with whom I work. I do not have any equity or get any revenue from these companies, but the healthcare system and the University of Colorado do. So I do have to point that out. So that being said, what I want to tell everybody is that we are in the most present, disruptive time in healthcare. And everybody self-identifies as something. Even though I do a little venture capital, I'm not a venture capitalist. Even though I administrate a lot, I do not consider myself an administrator. I identify as a husband, as a father, and a doctor. And that's the lens that I bring to innovation. But what I can tell you is that's not the lens everybody brings. Right? There are either lions at the gate or opportunity at the doorstep, because every single industry is looking at healthcare. In fact, the Institute of Health, National Institute of Health, say thou shall partner with industry if you're going to make a difference. So that's what I think you have to do. There has been exponential venture capital coming into digital health every single year, year over year. The amount of venture capital that has come into digital health last year was 2x what it was the year before, 2x the year before that. So the number of deals and the amount of money coming into digital health is absolutely incredible. So it's hard to know where to start, so I'm just going to start at the beginning. So in the beginning, there was man, right? And I want to give you a scope of the time. So for thousands of years, we were hunters and gatherers. We were a matriarchal society. We did not die early deaths unless it was traumatic, and there weren't a lot of us. Then for thousands of years, we were agricultural. We became fat. Our population increased, patriarchal, and then we started killing each other a lot. So thousands of years, thousands of years. And then the Industrial Revolution, 100 years, so thousands, 100, where we made machines that made things for us instead of being specialized or not being specialized in making all kinds of things for a family or a business. We made machines that made very specific things. Then the age of computers. But remember, for this decade, it was really computers who could do things that humans did. These were not computers that could think for themselves. These were computers that could simply calculate faster. So 100 mathematicians, a computer could do that in an hour. So this was the age of computing, the knowledge age. So think of the dot-com age. How many people here remember the first time, there are a lot of young people here, they sent their first email? I remember the first email I sent was in 1993. And I was sitting in my desk. I just graduated from medical school, and I sent an email to a friend of mine in New York City, and it blew my mind. But now think of the emails and how many they sent. So 1993 to now. And now think of mobile computing and app development and what that community means. So the dot-com built a community, apps built more community, and that now is mobile computing. And I put this up just so everybody goes, aw, isn't that cute? Right? So just think about, in a blink of an eye, how fast that happened. So think about the transition in time. Right? So now we're in this age of everything being connected to everything. So the internet of all things are all medical things. And in this age of data science. And data science is like population health. It means everything and nothing, depending on how you interpret it and who does it. But now we're in this era of cognition, so that machines are learning how to think. And we're teaching machines to think because we have to. We're also in this age of disruption and disruptors getting disrupted. And every single person knows exactly what I'm going to show next. Right? You know exactly what I'm going to show, but you can't give an innovation talk without mentioning Uber 3 times, at least 3 times. So Uber, founded in 2009, it's ubiquitous now. Turns out it was started by a really brilliant guy. Turns out not to be such a nice guy. But $70 billion valuation. They don't own a single car. And that's the theme here, change and money. But what's going to happen to Uber if self-driving cars don't come? Right, that's the second time I mentioned Uber. They're going to go out of business. They're going to be disrupted. Think about the most valuable companies in the United States are tech companies. Why is that important? Because think about what they do. They don't own oil fields or refineries. They own technology or software. And the only company up here that isn't a tech company is a company that invests in tech companies. So what about healthcare? Third time for Uber. Is there an Uber for healthcare? And what I would argue is this is where we are. Right, we're in Kodachrome and Polaroid, and we're not there yet, but it's coming really fast. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Amazon or used Amazon or someone you know has used Amazon. Okay. So I love Amazon. I think it's a remarkable company and it's a remarkable approach, but I want you to fundamentally think about how Amazon started. Amazon started selling books, right? No one really cares where their book comes from. They don't care. A book is a book is a book. It's a commodity. They don't have an emotional attachment unless you get a cup of coffee in the store that sold you the book. So Amazon started selling books. Then Amazon realized that the platform that they sell books on could be a platform to sell other things on. And that A9 search engine became the single most powerful, consistent search engine now, more powerful, more consistent than Google's search engine. They also then realized that they needed web services to support their business. So now Amazon Web Services is a core component of their business. They then wanted to deliver food, so they bought Whole Foods. On the day that they bought Whole Foods, Wegmans lost a third of their value. A third of their value. So how are they going to approach healthcare if they're even going to approach healthcare? And we know that they're going to approach healthcare, but how are they going to do it? I would bet that they're simply going to look at their own employees. They're going to develop an expertise on how to deliver healthcare to their employees, maybe supply chain about pharma, but that sort of thing. But that's what they're going to develop expertise in. Think about a simple pineapple. Right? Raise your hand if you've ever had a pineapple, seen a pineapple, or anybody you know has eaten a pineapple. Right? If you get in your car, go to the store, and buy a pineapple and come home, your out-of-pocket cost for that pineapple is less than Amazon's same-day delivery for a pineapple. So how can we compete with something like that? Think about Google. I had this really incredible experience. I went to Verily. So I was sitting in the offices in Google, and I pulled out my smartphone, and I tried to Google at Google. And I thought I'd create this black hole vortex of a thing, but nothing happened. But Google is doing Verily is doing this baseline project. And I'm sure you've heard of the baseline project, but I'll tell you what we know about it. It's a few hundred or a few thousand volunteers, because they won't tell anybody. And these volunteers have volunteered to wear wearables. We don't know exactly what wearables they're wearing, but they probably have almost every physiologic monitor they can being measured 24 hours a day. They have every molecule going in, every molecule going out, and the entire environment being measured. So think about those data being analyzed. And the reason that's important is think about the last time you went to your doctor, your last doctor visit. Your pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, physical exam, all within the 9 to 11 minutes it's allocated to see your doctor. And compare that to everything measurable about you for 6 months. So we're going to redefine what health and illness is. And that's what this is all about, because big data, data science is going to redefine that. So traditionally, when we think about innovation, we think about a thing that we've built, a thing that we're producing, a thing we're going to sell. But what I would argue is that innovation is really a different perspective, a different way to think about a problem, a different way to look at a problem, or to look at the same thing through fresh eyes. So I'm going to ask you to think about innovation from the perspective of a patient and what a patient sees. Now, if you're a patient, you see lines, right? It takes forever to access healthcare. How many of you would ever wait for a reservation in a hotel or a restaurant like you wait for healthcare? How many of you would schedule healthcare instead of like you schedule airlines? You would never do that. They see crowds, so huge crowds, and complexity, and massive paralyzing expense. Massive paralyzing expense. So $10,000 per patient per year in the United States, growing at 6% a year. And where's that money go? $1 trillion goes to hospitals. Almost $700 billion goes to healthcare providers. Does anybody know why hospitals and healthcare providers have separate bills? You think about it? It goes back to the 1700s and 1800s. When you were wealthy and of means, you had a doctor come to your home, and you got health care in your home, so you paid the doctor. If you were poor, you went to the poorhouse or a hospital, and you would contribute to the hospital or the poorhouse. So that 200-plus-year-old way still permeates how we do healthcare. Doctors and professionals get one bill, hospitals get another bill. And then there's pharmacology. So $340 billion goes to drugs. $340 billion. Of the top 10 prescribed drugs in the United States, 25% of them have a positive effect. 25% of them have a negative effect, and 50% of them don't do anything. So imagine that kind of math and technology coming. So what's going to happen? Now, why would this guy put a bungee jumper in the middle of this talk? The reason I put a bungee jumper is that the rate and risk of unintentional injury is exactly the same in bungee jumping and encountering healthcare for any reason. And we kill a lot of people. So you saw that Southwest Airline had an engine failure a couple weeks ago, and a woman was tragically killed, and think about the press. So in healthcare, we kill 2 plane loads of people a day. And maybe not here, but across the country. So the same injury rate as bungee jumping, and we kill 2 plane loads of people a year, almost 500,000 people. So what's going to happen? We're going to be disrupted, and we deserve to be disrupted. So this is the only slide where I have numbers on it. 85, 5 to 75, 1 in 5. So 85% of every known condition has some type of evidence-based or consensus-based guideline associated with it. Something that as a recommendation. And if you follow those guidelines, there's somewhere between a 5 and 75% improvement. Now, that's a broad number, and it could be dying or not dying, or it could just be 5% cheaper if you follow the guideline. In the United States, when you see a healthcare provider, there's a 1 in 5 chance that that healthcare provider will follow the guideline for your disease. That's unspeakable. I'll give you a little example. My wife, who I went to medical school to impress, developed a post-viral cough, just a simple cough. It lasted for 3 months. Now, I'm happy to sew up a toe on my kitchen table, but I'm not really happy to be the doctor for my wife. So I said, go see your primary care doctor. She called her primary care doctor, and she got an appointment for 7 months from Thursday. And then she sort of said, hey, I'm a doctor here. Can I see them sooner? And they acquiesced, and she could see him in a week. But she actually didn't see her doctor. She saw someone covering for her doctor. And this is a healthy woman with 3 months of a cough. It could be nothing, or it could be something. So this is what that doctor did. I'm not sure that doctor listened to her lungs. The doctor ordered a chest x-ray and gave her antibiotics. And I thought, that can't be right. So after paying the $800 bill for the chest x-ray and telling her not to fill the prescription, I did what I didn't want to do in the first place, which is I had my 12-year-old Google 52-year-old woman with a cough after a URI, and I was directed to 3 algorithms: American Academy of Family Medicine, internal medicine, preventative care. They were identical, and it said the exact same thing, which was not viral, not bacterial, probably allergic, inhaler steroid. So I wrote her a prescription for an inhaler steroid, and it went away, an antihistamine. So for free, my 12-year-old accurately diagnosed my wife when a physician couldn't, and then I paid too much money. So what's going to happen? We need clinical decision support to help us, because if a provider stayed up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, they could read half of everything published in their discipline. So I'll give you an example, pharyngitis. I did this search a few months ago. If you Google search pharyngitis, you get almost 500,000 hits. If you do a PubMed search, almost over 3,000 over 7 years. So how can someone keep up on every single thing published in every single thing? It's just not possible. Does everybody know this guy? You do? Buckminster Fuller. So if I could go back in time and have dinner or lunch or a drink with a handful of people, he'd be on the list. Thomas Jefferson, Martin Luther King, Enzo Ferrari, but this dude would be on the list. So this guy was an architect, mathematician, philosopher, poet. When he was in his 20s, just after graduate school, his youngest daughter died of spinal meningitis. And he decided that he was going to dedicate his career to changing the world. That's the only thing he ever said. So one of the things he did was he took the geodesic dome, which he didn't invent, Da Vinci first conceived of it, but he actually built it into a structure. So he built a structure out of something that was 1/10 the weight and built this structure. He also came up with this concept of knowledge doubling. So how long does it take for knowledge to double? And it was, in the 80s, proven true with computers, that his formula on how knowledge doubles is true. So think about the time of Einstein. Einstein wrote the special theory of relativity. Think about the scientific process and how the scientific process and connections and communication inform science. So scientists will either come up with a novel idea, and if they do, they will look at everything ever published around that novel idea, and it'll inform the next thing they do. However fast they can be informed of new things prompts them to think of other new things. So in the time of Einstein, if you published something or came up with a new idea, you hand wrote a letter, you sent it to a publisher, the publisher then sent you back, and you had this ongoing communication. If they chose to publish it, it would be published once a quarter, and if you were the professor of the universe at the university, you subscribed to this journal, but not everybody subscribed to it, and maybe the newspapers would cover it. So in the time of Einstein, knowledge doubled every 100 years. After World War II, radios, more communication, more publication, knowledge doubled every 25 years. In the 80s, knowledge doubled every 12 years. Currently, knowledge doubles every 12 to 14 months. So think about smartphones and mobile computing. And think about a smartphone in 2020, 50 smartphones a second will be activated. So a lot of us, I don't have a Twitter account, but I have someone who tweets on my behalf. So many scientists now, when they publish something, they tweet it, or a journal will tweet it, or it'll be on Facebook. So think about that communication, think about that connectivity, think about how people will think of new ideas, which means that there are going to be more things attached to the internet than people, and it means that by 2025, knowledge will double every 12 to 14 hours. 12 to 14 hours. So how is a human brain supposed to do that? Can our electronic medical records help? Can EPIC be anything other than a 4-letter word? Right? So you most recently installed an iteration of EPIC, and I'm sure you're all enthralled with it, right? But think about the history of electronic medical records. Think about what they were originally written to do. And I know this is a historic place for mumps, but you know, it's only used in one program on Earth. Electronic medical records were not designed for what we intend to use them for. They were not designed for medical communication, for documentation of medicine. They were designed to capture billing events for revenue cycle. And they do a magnificent job of it. If you look at the healthcare spend in the United States since electronic medical records, it's been an exponential curve. But they were not designed to bring intelligence into the physician workflow. So how can we do that? So can clinical decision support be easier and not harder? Fewer clicks, not more clicks? Should it be prescriptive? Should it tell you what to do? And prescriptive intelligence is the answer, because that's where we're going. We can't just be descriptive, this is what has happened. It can't be predictive, this may happen. It has to be prescriptive, here's what you're going to do. So take Amazon. So this is me. So I'm 51, I'll be 52 in a couple months. Less than a month. I played football in college. I like to do sports, which I'm trying to tell you is that every single part of me creaks and aches. And I love to ski. I moved to Colorado. I go skiing a lot. And when I go skiing, I put Advil in every crevice of my being because it just hurts all the time. So I had myself, my 3 kids, and my wife around the kitchen table, and we all searched for Advil on Amazon. Now, Amazon's really interesting. The searches in the United States, 75% of them are on Google. Searches for a product half of them are on Amazon, which means that Amazon now is a search engine with a warehouse. But when I searched for Advil, it also recommended that I buy Pepto-Bismol and Shout. And I don't know why Pepto-Bismol and Shout, but I bought the Pepto-Bismol, I didn't buy the Shout. But all my kids had something different, so prescriptive. It was telling me what to do or what I should do. So this is a company that we started with 3 guys in a garage in Palo Alto called Agile MD, and I just introduced you to them last night. It should be simplistic, but how do we bring pathways and guidelines into the clinical workflow? And you would think that all you have to do is tell a physician or a provider about a guideline and they'll follow it, but they really can't. You'd think that putting it next to them, like on a PDF or in a book, would prompt them to follow it, but they can't. So this company developed a way to integrate within the workflow in Epic with us, and we have 80 emergency department pathways. We have all the VIA oncology pathways, thoracic surgery, and all these, and now nursing pathways. And with one click, it brings up a pathway, and if you follow it, it automatically populates the orders and automatically populates the medical decision-making in the electronic record. So you click a button, and your documentation on why you did what you did is in there, and then guideline-compliant therapy. So what we saw, and the first time I realized this was working, is we implemented it in our emergency departments, and then 3 months later, I had a negotiating session with one of our payers. And usually you negotiate for use high-cost imaging like this, admit this number of patients for our subscribers. And they said, what did you do to reduce the utilization of high-cost imaging? And it turns out that this is what we did. So we've seen decrease in variability, significant decrease in variability, guideline compliance over 80% for those specific targeted diseases, decrease in utilization, decrease in length of stay, decrease in complications across every specialty just by embedding pathways that can automatically populate. So fewer clicks and not harder. What about the prescribing problem? So think about the last time you prescribed a medicine and why you prescribed that medicine. I can tell you that the literature will say that the ability to spell a medication has just as much to do in physician choice of a medication as the indications for the medication. So using this next tool I'm going to show you and the previous, we deployed a guideline for hyperemesis gravidarum, so morning sickness. And what do you think the most commonly prescribed medication for morning sickness is? Just guess. Starts with a Z. Zofran. It's not guideline, it's not first line therapy for morning sickness. Do you know what it is? Pyridoxine. But no one used it because no one could actually spell it and didn't know about it. So with a pathway and with this next tool, we went from 2% to 92%, and it's cheaper. So simple things like that. So I'm a medium smart doctor, and I think that I can remember 5 or 6 antihypertensives. So working with a company called RX Review, who developed a program with us called RX Check, you can go right into the Epic platform. You populate the indications just like you would document. And based on the indications, based on specific patient characteristics, based on specific payer characteristics and formulary characteristics, it gives you a first line, second line, third line for a medication that the patient can afford and actually get. So think about heart failure, right? What's the latest, most expensive, great medicine for heart failure? Right? What is it?
Entresto.
Right, Entresto. It's the first time in 20 years that there's been an advancement in heart failure that has reduced mortality. But it's reduced it by this much, right? Not by this much. And compared to previous guideline therapy, it was 4 medications, I think, 4, compared to 1. But depending on who your insurance company is, if you got prescribed that medicine, you could go to the pharmacy and they'll say, "Can I have $40,000, please?" So the bulk rate, the number of times a patient went to the pharmacy and didn't fill the prescription, was enormous. But with this tool, a physician would never prescribe a patient a medication that they couldn't use. So think about the prescribing problem. So this is the part where I say if they can do it, we can too. Raise your hand if you've ever been on a plane, seen a plane, or yeah. You would never, ever, and maybe Southwest was not the greatest example, but you would never, ever, ever book a flight on an airline that didn't take online reservations. Even if you wanted to call to book a flight, you still wouldn't do it because you wouldn't trust them. So think about healthcare and the millennial generation, or even the newer millennial generation, about whether they would ever trust healthcare they couldn't deal with online or book online. So I took a little creative license with this Amazon search and put in Amazon urgent care. So we've read about what Amazon is doing and what they're not doing. What we know is they've hired a big chunk of doctors, the rumor is 10 to 100, licensed in every state, and that they're going to start delivering virtual health for Prime subscribers, right? That's pretty wild. So we set up a virtual urgent care, and we didn't even advertise it. We just put it on our portal for our own patients, and we've had exponential increase in utilization because people really like it. And we started to build these kiosks because people want to do physical exam or feel like they need physical exam. So you can go have a virtual encounter and put a stethoscope on, put a, what thing's called in your ear? Otoscope in your ear. But it turns out that when we reviewed all of our virtual urgent cares, physical exam didn't make a difference one way or the other, so we're going to eliminate these. In Colorado, we have a huge growing population. So unlike Massachusetts and other big cities on the coasts, our population grows by 14 to 18,000 in the greater Denver area per month are moving to Colorado. So we're actually building new hospitals, and we're building micro hospitals and decentralized hospitals out in the hinterlands or close to where people live. And instead of having people transferred for tertiary and quaternary referral, we bring the physician out to the patient in the community hospital. We also bring an ambulance with a CAT scanner and TPA and a neurologist virtually to a patient's driveway, so we can do targeted, directed stroke care in a patient's driveway by decentralizing. And if we think again about Amazon, in the next 10 years, maybe 15 or 8, all home computing will be voice. And if you think about the Google Home or the Echo, they sort of listen and record everything you do. And Google has shown that they are able to record language and be able to put an algorithm in to predict heart failure and to predict asthma and respiratory illness. So the future of home health may be just a computer. And we're doing a project with skilled nursing facilities where instead of bringing them to the emergency department, we actually bring the emergency department to them. And if you think about nursing home readmissions to the emergency department, do you know the #1 cause? You'd probably think it was pneumonia, heart failure, fall, fracture. It's nosebleeds. So by simply having a virtual health, talking a nurse through it, we avoid an emergency department visit for a huge number of skilled nursing facility patients. And those nosebleeds can cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for an ambulance for an emergency department visit and then a return visit. So think about the ROI and the disruption. What happens when you search for, that's brachytherapy in Denver? What happens if Prime subscribers have a Prime network of doctors that when they search to, just like plumbers now, just like car mechanics, just like people to come and assemble a swing set that you can do through Amazon, you can go and look for a doctor. What's to keep us from doing remote health, even procedural health? So this is a group of, these are 2 pilots in Idaho flying a drone in Afghanistan. This is a football helmet. This is the Denver Broncos, I'm sorry. So what's to keep us from doing something like surgery? So this is Google Glass, which is expensive and doesn't work, but this is something called a pivot head. Everybody heard of these things? So I bought these a year and a half ago for $300 on Amazon because my son was graduating from high school and my sister couldn't come. So I bought these things for $300, I put them on my face, I connected them to my iPhone, and I broadcast my son's graduation. So for $300, we put these on a surgeon in the community hospital or rural hospital. And we had a surgeon at the tertiary medical center walk them through a AAA repair, an abdominal aneurysm repair. Because if you ask surgeons and you get them to tell the truth, they'll tell you it's the surgical decision making that's really important. The technique is important, but it's the decision making. Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? Where should I do it? How should I do it? So now we can have a surgeon in a tertiary environment walk a general surgeon in a frontier hospital. Remember in Colorado, it's a big deal to get a patient from a small hospital to a big hospital. So why can't we do it anywhere else? This is the part where I talk about wearables. So wearables, everybody has an iWatch or a Fitbit, and I see millions of them around. How connected are they and how accurate are they? My wife installed cameras in our house 3 months ago because we had someone come and steal bicycles from our back garage. And 5 or 6 years ago, to set up a security system of cameras in a home would have been thousands and thousands of dollars in a professional. So she ordered Arlo. You ever heard of Arlo? For $500, we got 8 cameras. She took them out of the box, put a battery in them, turned them on. They all talked to each other, set up a web address, automatically connected to her iPhone, just with a touch and putting in a code. But what about medical devices? Are medical devices talking to each other like that? And we just had a conversation this morning about Capsule and whether you should use Capsule, which is a Qualcomm device, to have everything talk to each other and data go to one place. That's a healthcare problem. It's not a out of healthcare problem because everything talks to everything else, because if they don't, you won't buy it and you won't use it. So if we do that, care needs to be accurate and intelligent. So if you think about the previous iteration of a Fitbit, it was 20% inaccurate. The latest version of a Fitbit is 98% accurate, which means that now we can use it as a medical device. And now we're showing that Fitbits can actually predict things like atrial fibrillation or measure atrial fibrillation. What we don't know is what to do with that information yet. And then think about 5G. So 5G, 5th generation cellular, will actually make cellular higher fidelity than coaxial cable. So our kids will not know what coaxial cable is, or their kids won't, just like they don't know what it is to roll down the window in a car, right? They don't know that. Because comparing 5G to 4G is like a pipeline to a garden hose. And the reason why that's important to us is we're building hospitals. So think about building hospitals or healthcare systems that don't need to be hardwired. Think about your Fitbit not having to talk to your iPhone to go to the cloud, but being sufficiently energized to talk directly to the cloud. It really changes the paradigm of everything you wear, everything you touch, and how you approach wearables and devices. So think about a patch that has 3-month battery life, 3-year shelf life, costs $6 to make, has ECG, pulse oximetry, plasmography, and 3D motion, and talks directly to the cloud. That's redefining health and redefining illness. What if you can put a chip in? Right? The chip is going to completely alter the way that we do healthcare, and then healthcare becomes more like air traffic control than it does become individualized patient care. So this is monitors from a virtual ICU that we set up. So building new hospitals, we're not building ICUs. We're deploying mobile technology and bringing all of that ICU centralized. So this is a Vizio device. This is one of the devices available, the one that we chose to use. So waveforms from this are going into the cloud and then doing predictive and prescriptive analytics on those waveforms. And we're identifying early illness. So we're identifying patients that have signals where they're going to become septic instead of meeting SIRS criteria, or they're going to become ill, or they're having post-operative wound infections before they become febrile, before they become symptomatic. So all of these information is going to one place. But if you look at this, this is still pretty old-fashioned. Right? It's still looking at waveforms, looking at individual patients. So what kind of user interface can we do? Because humans can still only absorb 0.1% of everything that goes into an electronic medical record or comes out on a monitor. So what happened in airlines? Right? Think about World War II bomber. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, engineer. The co-pilot and pilot actually had to fly the plane. The engineer had to know how everything is wired because they had to reroute stuff if things broke, and the navigator had the stopwatch and the map. But when you fly in a plane, who's flying the plane? Yeah, computers flying the plane. So what happened in the airline industry when that big drop in crashes happened? It was a unified user interface. That's what happened. All of those data from all of those different devices came to one place, so the most important things that needed to be seen could be seen. So now, retrograde cockpits have iPads in them, and then new cockpits are essentially glass cockpits, where they have a user interface that's useful, and only the things that a human needs to see is brought forth to the human. So why can't an ICU be like that? Because an ICU should be that, or an OR. Right, so this is the last plane crash that was attributed to human error. Anybody name what the human error was?
It was in San Francisco, right?
That was in Asia. Yeah, so it was that the pilots shut off the computer. because they were taking off, they were tired, it was foggy, they couldn't see, the computer was telling them to do one thing, they couldn't make sense of it, so they shut it off and they crashed. Right? And that makes sense. So how many of you have cars with these sensors on the bumpers? And how many of you gotten some little piece of something stuck on the sensors and shut it off and then poof, I've done it, right? You just are used to it being there. So what about all this information that comes off of an ICU patient in an ICU? You can't interpret all of it. So this is a company that you're going to start working with, right? A company called Alert Watch that has developed a user interface for high acuity conditions. And we're going to start doing it across all of our emergency departments and all of our acute care settings, where it only brings forward to the clinician what the clinician needs to see. So if all the systems are green, you don't even see it. If something's wrong, it shows you which system to look at, why it's wrong, and what to do. So at the University of Michigan, where this was developed, when they deployed it, they reduced the use of intraoperative blood by 50%. 50%. And those data are remarkable over and over again. So this begs the question, do patients even need us? So when you make an appointment at the University of Colorado as an outpatient, you get a message on your iPhone. And I don't know if you can read that, but it says you will receive a wearable in the mail. So you get a wearable, it turns on, you don't do anything, you don't connect anything, put it on, turn it on. You go see your doctor, and your doctor will spend time with you, and you should be asking, why should you even see a doctor? But your doctor spends time with you and goes over your wearable data, right? Even United Healthcare has done the same thing. So United has a program called the United Motion Program, where if you're a subscriber and you put on this device and you meet certain metrics, they refund sometimes up to $1,500 in your flexible spending account, and disease gets better. And all wearables are essentially the same, but they had this interesting problem where they had to make sure that I didn't give my wearable to you and meet those metrics. So they looked at steps, but then they said, how can we identify it's really you? And what they saw was that your gait is like a thumbprint. So your gait is very specific. Then with further analysis, what we also saw was that if you are prone to certain illnesses, your gait begins to change. If you have a response to therapy, your gait begins to change. If you have undiagnosed depression, you have a very specific gait. Now here's why that's important. We're doing a project with Fitbit and the company that does this data to look at patients who have undiagnosed, untreated comorbid depression. So there are clinicians in the room, and we looked at patients who have depression who are not being treated versus patients who have depression who are being treated and compared them with comorbidities. And we identified this huge pharmacology spend on patients who have untreated, undiagnosed depression. If I were to ask you to guess what medications untreated patients with depression have, you would probably guess anxiolytics, pain medicine. What we found was Humira, Enbrel, and I know you have a history with Enbrel here, and insulin. Because patients with undiagnosed depression develop all kinds of somatic illness, and they have a huge healthcare spend compared to treated patients with depression, because it's a real disease. And when you treat it, all of a sudden, you don't spend so much money on healthcare. And you can diagnose it with just a wearable. You can also see patients' parameters for weeks, blood pressure, pulse, everything, and measure their sleep. You can also measure molecules. So this is a carbohydrate, a sugar molecule, and everybody here knows the difference between a type 2 diabetic and a non-type 2 diabetic. So this is me. That's not my abdomen, unfortunately. I'm not a diabetic, although I deserve to be a diabetic. And this is my glucose curve for 3 days. So before I put this thing on, and this is a Dexcom device, if you saw Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, show his glucose on his watch, that was actually the Dexcom device talking to his iWatch. I became Atkins for 3 days before I put this device on me, so I wanted my absolute baseline glucose. Then I put the device on, and I ate this kind of breakfast. I've eaten breakfasts like this before. I don't typically eat them every day. Then I actually ate 8 cupcakes, not 4. Nothing happened to my glucose. Then I ate this kind of a lunch. Now, I've had lunches like this, but usually not on the same day I have a breakfast like this. And then I had pasta. Nothing happened to my glucose. Nothing. Then I had a beer. I may have had more. It was for science, so that's okay. Then I did something which was I coached my 12-year-old tackle football game. I'm the assistant defensive coordinator. And look what happened to my glucose, because I had a stress response. And then I ate pizza. And then 12 people on my team also put this device on, and when they ate pizza, the same thing happened. So I'm not telling you what to do. This is purely anecdotal, but I try not to eat pizza anymore. So what happens when we can take this device and put it on an inpatient, because it's actually cheaper than doing finger sticks? And is glucose an early signal for something? Will you become transiently hyperglycemic when you're about to be septic in 6 hours? We know that glucose control intraoperatively is directly correlative to wound infection. So what happens when we do that? So here's what we did with type 2 diabetics in the Dexcom device, is we took type 2 diabetics. What's the hardest thing to get patients to do? Lose weight, change what they eat. So type 2 diabetics with the Dexcom app did 3 really easy things. It just said whatever you ate just increased your glucose. Didn't even say that. It just said bing, 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 your glucose is high. It said you just ate, it's time to get up and move around. And it said, when did you take your medicine? Because Q-day means different things to different people, or BID means different things. Those 3 interventions made people who were on more than 1 oral hypoglycemic go to 1. People were about to be on insulin, go back to oral hypoglycemics. People on insulin decrease the amount of insulin. Really simple things, $4,000 a year. So this next part is a little bit hokey, and I apologize for the hokiness. But I want you to think about Siri and voice recognition. And does anybody have the new iPhone 10? I got the new iPhone 10, and I happened to have Siri as a British man, and I didn't know why Siri didn't work, and I thought, it's actually just condescending to me, that's why. So I changed the voice. But think about voice recognition, think about facial recognition. It will come to be that you'll walk directly on a plane without having to stop at security because of facial recognition and the way in which stress recognizes your face. Then think about a Tesla. And a Tesla can drive itself when it recognizes the lanes, when the GPS and the radar all match. So we have a virtual urgent care that I told you about. It turns out that 90% of the patients who call virtual urgent care have the same 5 complaints. And those same 5 complaints almost end all the time in the same outcome: an antibiotic for a UTI, nothing for a URI, or a beta agonist or something like that. So we're working with an AI company to build a bot that will actually deliver urgent care. So this is a bot. This is not the bot. This is the company that made that bot that I then went and found that company to see if they'll actually do it. But think about any other AI. You pick the user interface. So the patient picks a woman in her early 30s with really weird fingernail polish and the voice. And then look at the dots on the guy's face. And that's facial recognition looking for facial stress and voice patterns.
You had 5 asthma attacks last week, David. What's going on?
Not feeling well. I got a cold starting. Had to go to Barstow twice for work.
Barstow's nice and dry. What's your asthma keeping you from doing?
Yeah, well, normal life for starters. Like walk upstairs, play with the kids, go see a movie.
Okay, well, here's some weather for you, and I can't say it's nice out. Your neighborhood AQI is 160, humidity's down, and particulate matter's up, so you'll have a 65% increased risk of an attack today. You got some popcorn in the house?
Sure, I get it. Not going out today.
Right, and keep your Advair inhaler nearby.
Okay, every 2 hours I take 1 shot, right?
That's it. You want me to remind you when you need to take it?
Send me an SMS.
Okay, talk with you soon.
So think of those of you who've ever had an upper respiratory infection, or those of us who've treated upper respiratory infection. I can't ever remember knowing the weather patterns for where the patient lived, the pollen counts where the patient lived, and I've never texted a patient to remind them to take their medicine. So think about that. So maybe the first aid kit of the future you'll order from Amazon, and they'll have Band-Aids in there. Maybe there'll be a pregnancy test. Have you seen this pregnancy test? Connected pregnancy test. You take out the pregnancy test. If it's positive, goes up to the cloud, calls your insurer and your physician. They send you vitamins and schedule your first appointment. Or a meter dose inhaler that's connected that does PFTs on a kid using an asthma inhaler, and they can predict an asthma attack before they actually have to go to the hospital or the emergency department. Maybe there'll be these glasses that you put on, and you can look at your significant other, and they'll talk to you and ask you to do an exam and evaluate them. Maybe there'll just be a patch that you put on, talks to the cloud, in which prescriptive algorithms, it'll tell you what to do, or maybe there'll just be a bot. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the great talk, and also look to the future. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the audience. Maybe I'll start with one. Can you talk a little bit about the adoption curve? Because I think we always hear this term, at least in clinical medicine, the average time from discovery or invention to widespread adoption is about 17 years. And you talk about the doubling of the knowledge base from 12 to 14 months or 12 to 10 hours. How do you see, and how have you done it locally, your health system, drive adoption of some technologies, and how far are we from actually adopting these things? Because it exists today already. But how do we go into the right validation, the evidence generation, the safety effectiveness, but also just the culture transformation to actually adopt these things?
So that's a great question, and that's the question. I am very lucky in that I'm an academic chair and a clinical director of a large service. So these doctors work for me or paid by me, and they're incentivized. So 30% of all the doctor salaries are incentivized. And what we do for clinical decision support is it's never a force function, it's never a hard stop, it's never a thou shalt use it. It is, however, you are measured on your productivity, your compliance to quality, and you know it right away. So every doctor can take out their iPhone at the end of their day, pull up Power BI, and they get a personal sheet on how they did that day, consistent with expectations, consistent with how it affects their bonus. So there's real skin in the game to be compliant. And then the clinical decision support is the path of least resistance. So it's easier to use instead of harder to use. There's never a hard stop. It's fewer clicks instead of more clicks, and it's easier. So that's the way that we have to drive adoption, is not just do it because it's the right thing to do, but do it because we're being respectful of providers, and it's easier and not harder.
Awesome. Thanks. Question, David.
Great talk. Thank you for coming. I'm David Zane from Department of Surgery, and my question is: a lot of innovations is nowadays focused on developing new technology, and there's obviously cost implications, but also a lot of innovations probably don't need technologies. And so I'm sort of curious of sort of your thoughts on sort of influences or bias in the system where we're encouraged to look for technology-driven innovation versus non-technology-driven innovation.
So also a great question, and you're right, innovation is not just technology, just like it's not devices or drugs. Technology could just be a different way of thinking. So just an example from my own experience, we had the opportunity to reinvent how we delivered care. So instead of just taking the old process, because a bad process can kill a good person anytime, we actually paired physicians with executives and engineers and nurses. So what's a triad, quadrad, right? Those were the teams, and we challenged them to look for the ideal way in which care is delivered from the patient perspective. Blue ocean process, and then implemented that process. So just across primary care and emergency care, we hired 22% more people, decreased cost per visit by 18%, and then everybody who designed that system gets to share in those wins. And there wasn't one single piece of technology that was deployed during that, except that we were data-driven, which means that every single time we had a win, we published it to everybody. Every single time something got worse, we published it to everybody.
Question.
So we have Epic as
You speak up a little bit.
We have Epic as does most of the country. So how do you see a future with Epic being able to do anything like this, or is it going to be outside sources trying to create this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the question is, can Epic do everything? And the answer is no, not even close. But why would we expect Epic to be able to do everything? So we have some guiding principles about how to bring clinical decision support to providers. And the guiding principle is it has to be within the workflow of the provider, and the provider can never have to be required to leave the Epic environment or think that they're leaving the Epic environment. So all the things that I showed you are add-ons on top of the workflow. One lives on an Amazon server in New Jersey, the other one lives on a Google server. A clinician in their everyday practice would never know that those are not within Epic, but they're not within Epic. But they appear as though they're integrated within Epic.
You know, one of the things we struggle with is this idea that at the front lines, the same docs and nurses, there's a lot more solutions out there than sort of the people at the front lines who actually managing the patient. How do you manage sort of the inflow of all these solutions? How do you gatekeep and say there's only so much bandwidth for innovation in the frontline staff? Is there sort of a limited number of times a year you approach certain clinical staff, or is there, how do you balance that? Because I can imagine it would be overwhelming if you really talk about introducing all these different solutions at the same time, and how do you sort of balance this?
So part of that is being very transparent about what's important. So we have a portal where you can see exactly what we're working on. So from the perspective of digital health, we're really interested in 4 discrete areas: quality and safety, efficiency, patient experience, and access. Those are the 4 things we're working on. Just those 4. So virtual reality goes in there, digital health, clinical decision support, intelligence, online scheduling. That's what we're working on. We're also very transparent about what we will do and what we won't do and how we make that decision. So if you're a frontline provider and you say there should be an app for that, we say we're not going to do that right now, and here's why, but here's what we are going to do. So people love to come up with new ideas. Very few people actually have the infrastructure to implement those ideas. But to keep creativity coming, we're very transparent. Saying, we don't say, yes, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you get back to me? We say, here's why we're not doing it. Here's what we are doing it. If you'd like to participate, here's how you participate.
Yeah. I think that's very important. Aaron?
Thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask you how you think about liability and malpractice in an era, and you're certainly pushing the boundaries of how information flows and decisions are made and where information is generated. I think that's one of the things that really prevents innovation from an individual provider's perspective, because they're taught to practice a certain way. They tend to execute their practice the way that they were learned, in a way that sort of has with it all kinds of not spoken sort of self-preservation, protection, how you treat and look at information in many ways. Medical record is like, as you said, with billing, but also sort of documentation doesn't really reflect the pulse of what's really going on minute to minute in the hospital.
Yeah, so there are a couple things. One is, we were just talking about this earlier today. There's a disincentive sometimes to be more efficient, both from an actual, here's how much you get paid perspective, but also from, as you point out, this tolerance for risk or this perception of risk. So from the perspective of this perception of risk, it turns out that when you are very transparent about the expectations for decision making, you do not need to do a cath on this patient for this reason because it's on the algorithm. And the providers have had participation in developing that intelligence. So before you would say that, the cardiologist would be included in developing that. We wouldn't just cut and paste evidence-based guidelines from the New England Journal. We would say, here's what's in the New England Journal. We would like to be able to represent an accurate reflection of this. How shall we build the pathway? And then we'll work with cardiologists, emergency physicians, internists, and say, here's what it is. And it turns out that there's a lot of fidelity in that process. So if you feel like there's evidence in front of you, you don't feel at risk for not doing the cardiac catheterization. On the other side, there was this issue of utilization of high-cost imaging because it increases the complexity of the visit and actually increases your code and your reimbursement. So we work with payers to recognize that if they use an algorithm, and this algorithm is evidence-based, and it winds up not using a resource like a CAT scan, we can still collect the higher professional code because it was a complex medical decision and not incur the expense of the CT scan. Now, the facility's not so happy about that because we're not doing the CAT scan, but one thing at a time.
That's fascinating. So, in the past, partners have done this thing called demonstration projects, so the same concept that is in that example, because the provider stays whole.
Right.
So they're incentivized to adopt this new technology, which is the right thing for the patient. And the facility, that negates, but we get the right quality, better quality care.
It's the way that we had the conversation with the facility is that the higher cost procedures and higher cost imaging and higher cost testing that will be eliminated by clinical decision support is really at the lower end of the complexity. So we can backfill with even higher complex studies, testing, procedures.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Follow-up question to the previous comment, which is, do you ask your technology partners to share the burden of malpractice? Do they have to now buy malpractice insurance?
No.
AI companies?
No, not at all. Yeah, again, this is very regional conversation. Where I work in the Wild West, this never actually has come up. It's really interesting.
As I'm careful of the hour, and most will have to go. So just want to say thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.